So in Gloria Ladson-Billings' work, she talks about critical consciousness. And what she speaks about is the fact that we need to question what is norm, and really talk about the injustices and inequity within society. So her work, not only does it talk about the injustices, she also talks about the fact that it's one thing to actually be able to identify when there is an injustice, but that we need to act upon it, right? And so in our classroom, we kind of had a very amazing inquiry that came and emerged from the learners. They were in the classroom kind of naming off all of the subway stops within Toronto. And every day it just kept continuing within their play. And I was like, what is this about? So I ended up going to TTC and then just getting a map. And the next day I left it out. And it was almost like a provocation to see what they would do with it. And the learners started observing the maps, they were questioning things, and they started asking me for things. So I said to them, like, what is it that you want me to support you with? So they said that they needed tape because they were interested in actually recreating the subway line on the carpet. So when it comes to our job, sometimes like we want to control everything that's happening. And I wondered to myself what the caretakers would think about us putting this map on the carpet. But I decided to let it go and allow them to do what they wanted to do. And another thing when thinking about the learning environment is really thinking about accessibility, whether or not the materials are accessible to the learners. And because it was accessible to the learners, they already knew what they needed to orchestrate their thinking. So they started taping all of the lines, they started coloring it in, and what they ended up doing was they used the computer, they became researchers, they started labeling all of these little labels that they then put on the ground. And it was great because it was authentic work that came from them. They were exploring writing. It was one-to-one correspondence. There's so many things that were happening. There were so many concepts of math that were being explored as well. And as they were creating it, they noticed and they came upon the symbol of accessibility. So they then said, what is this? So it was a great question to explore, and we ended up asking them, what is this? So some students had said, well, sometimes when people are blind, they're not able to see where they're going, so they need to use an elevator to get them somewhere. So we had explored the conversation around accessibility. And what the learners had noticed was they started counting all of the subway stops that were accessible, and they noticed that some did not have the accessibility symbol. So as they were inquiring, they said to me, well, why aren't all the stops accessible? And I was like, that's a great question. What might we do with that question? So they decided as a collective that they wanted to actually write to TTC. So we ended up writing a letter to TTC asking them why the routes weren't accessible. So they said, this is how many stops are accessible, these are how many are not accessible, why can't we provide access to those that need it? And it was really great because this was something that we did as a shared writing piece, and we sent it, and it was in French, but we translated it in English, and we sent it off to TTC, and they sent back a response saying that in 2018, all the subways would be accessible. So for us, it was really for us to think about what is norm. So we really talked about the fact that like some stops were accessible, but who was it accessible for? So it wasn't accessible for everyone. And that really made us think about what it was that was happening in our society that was pretty unjust. And so as Gloria Ladson-Billings talks about, it's really important for us to be able to act upon the things in which we see as being unjust or inequitable. And it was a great learning experience. The learners were really excited when they did get a response, but it was a little piece of activism, right? So they were actually engaging in conversations, but they were agents of change in that moment.